Reading is fundamentally a waste of time, apparently, when the topic is President Joe Biden. Hey, everybody, I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott. This is Right Angle, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. And I got to amuse Bill on the intro. I always love doing that. Today's topic comes to us courtesy of the National Pulse. I gotta read this intro to you because I got a kick out of this. The book industry has seen significantly lower sales during the Biden presidency compared to the Trump era. Books about former President Donald Trump sold millions of copies, but those focused on Biden have struggled to generate interest. Several books about the Bidens have sold fewer than a humiliating 5,000 copies each. And then we get to the spin. I love the spin. I live for the spin because, well, I'm a lover of absurdity. Politico's Jonathan Allen tried putting this spin on the story. Biden has tried to be kind of a drama-free president, certainly in comparison to his predecessor, and that makes it harder to write a book, both in terms of getting information and turning his story into one that is compelling for readers. Bill, I find it hard to believe that we can't find anything interesting to write about a guy who needs a Sherpa guide and a pith helmet to find his way through a sentence, who got rich without ever producing a good or providing a legal service, and whose surviving children just are advertisements for emotional neglect and abuse. Do you buy into that?
Well, Steve, I can perhaps answer this question for you with another question. Do you know how many smartly written, bitingly satirical criticisms of Joseph Stalin were written during the Soviet Union?
Oh, I know this. 4.
No, there was none.
Oh, so close.
No, so close. And the reason that there was none was because that was not the narrative enforced by the state. Now, we're not at that point yet, and obviously I don't think we'll ever get to that point because that's what they're trying to do. And I've lately become aware of the fact that they're just trying to convince us to just walk off the field. So I'm decided to be a lot more optimistic about all these other things because, frankly, I don't think they're going to win. But with that said, Steve, they don't write books about Joe Biden for the same reason that these news stories about Joe Biden don't get coverage, the same reason that the Hunter Biden laptop story didn't get any coverage and all the rest of it. When you have the kind of connection between the Democratic Party and the mainstream news media as exists today, it's bad for democracy. And I need to keep saying this because I just want people to make sure that this is not just some partisan comment. If the reverse were true, if the media covered for Republicans the way they covered for Democrats, then Republicans would be nothing but a bunch of corrupt, openly criminal people because it's I don't remember who said it. Was either Andrew Breitbart or maybe it was Andrew Klavan. I think maybe it was actually Andrew Klavan who said that media coverage is like the ring of power for politicians. It's a cloak of invisibility. They put it on and they're convinced that they won't be seen. And once that happens, they commit all kinds of the most egregious,
it's human nature.
Crimes that's right, yeah. and that's why a lot of people. I'm talking to you, Antifa, like to wear masks because when they're wearing a mask and all of the internet, tough guy and all of the internet comments that are simply beyond belief in many cases, all of these are the result of anonymity. You don't have to be seen. You don't have to face the people, and so. When they say that they don't write any books about Biden because Biden's just such a swell guy and he's just such a low drama president, that's the cover story for the deeper truth. You probably remember when Obama was president and people were saying why isn't there anything why aren't any people joking about Obama the way they joked about Bush? It's because there's nothing funny about Obama. He's just so perfect, and in every way.
I remember that.
Now. To be fair about this, conservatives have a hard time. Well, there are things that conservatives are good at, like building bridges and things like that, and they're not terribly good with a bunch of other things that require what Evan Sayek called rhetorical intelligence. And for the longest time, I thought that it was actually, with the exception of Scott Ott and a few other people, virtually impossible to write funny things about conservatives. And then along comes the Babylon Bee and says, to write funny things about liberals. And along comes the Babylon Bee and says, no, it's entirely possible. But all of this just to say, Steve, that there are no books about Biden being written, because if you did write a book about Biden, it would be, well, it would sell 5,000 copies, because the truth about Joe Biden is just so obvious that no one talks about it. I mean, the amount of evidence on Hunter Biden's laptop for genuine bribes from foreign powers is overwhelming, and the number of these lost in space looks from him are overwhelming, and the stumbles are overwhelming, and all the rest of it's overwhelming, and this has to be suppressed, and it is suppressed. So no, I'm not surprised, and this isn't good for the Republic. What annoys me when they go after Trump is that they go after Trump without going after Biden. It's the job of the press to go after the president. I want them to go after the president. I want them to go after Republican presidents, and I want them to go after Democratic presidents. Sunlight is the best disinfectant, and if this thing was working according to specs, we wouldn't be in this trouble. But when the scrutiny of the press, or in this case print media, or whatever other form of investigation, is limited to one side only, where all of the investigations are being done against conservatives, and all of the investigations are being covered up for Democrats, you're going to end up with a society with some pretty serious problems, because, as I've said many times, this ability to write and report about the truth is the immune system of the body. And when the immune system no longer functions, you get autoimmune diseases, and that's what we're suffering from right now.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I'm gonna list some of these books and their sales figures, but I'm leaving out the authors' names to spare them the embarrassment. The Long Alliance: The Imperfect Union of Joe Biden and Barack Obama sold fewer than 1,500 copies. Jill: A Biography of the First Lady, sold fewer than 2,500 copies. The Fight of His Life. Exciting title here. The Fight of His Life: Inside Joe Biden's White House and the Bidens Inside the First Family's 50-Year Rise to Power. There's a problem right there. Each sold fewer than 5,000 copies. Scott, you have written and published a book or two, and the reason I'm asking you this question is you're not the you're not the guy to write the salacious stuff, the real scandalous stuff. So with that in mind, what angle would you take as a writer to write a book about Joe Biden that might actually sell?
I don't know if that's a possible thing to do. I was just thinking, and I don't have exact numbers on this. I'm pretty sure those figures you just listed for the Biden books were exceeded by my own book known as Axis of Weasels. I think even my less well-selling book, Laughing at Obama, Volume 1, sold more copies than several of those that you just listed. So... and that was with no backing from any company. They were self-published. It was, I don't have an email list. I don't know. Anyway, I think the challenge with Joe Biden is, you don't want to read a book about a politician, and I should just end the sentence there. You don't want to read a book about a politician. I think if somebody wrote a book about Harry Truman in 1970, meaning how Harry Truman was in 1970, people would be like complaining that there were no stories from the late 1940s and early 1950s, because that was his heyday. That's when he had some accomplishments. He was just living in Independence, Missouri in 1970 and, in retirement. And there's a sense in which it feels like that's what Joe Biden is. Whatever happened in his career, most people think, probably happened years ago, although nobody could really put their finger on what that might have been, what actual accomplishes. The only stories we know about him are his oft-repeated stories of loss when his wife and child died in a car crash. And so, we have that. We know that President Obama picked him to be the vice president, and we have that. But, he's not a charismatic figure. He's not a man of great accomplishment. He's not particularly controversial in the sense that, he's like a slightly less coherent Chuck Schumer. He's just a party line guy who somehow managed to float to the top with the rest of the flotsam, and he happened to be at the right place at the right time. And nobody is looking at him and going, wow, I wonder what makes Joe Biden tick. They are wondering what that ticking noise is when Joe Biden is near them, but they don't, where if you have a book about Donald Trump, for example, he's an inherently interesting person, whether you like him or don't like him. He's dynamic, he's compelling, he's likely to say unexpected things. He's not likely to necessarily just mouth the party line. And so he's a much more dynamic individual, somebody that you might want to read a book about. I also think to a certain extent, I don't know how this stacks up, but I'd be interested to see the general figures on political books right now. I think people are kind of tired of it all. And sick of politicians. I mean, if the reason why we want to read about politicians is not because we want to know more about political hacks. Like we read about Kennedy, but we don't read about the mundane Senate maneuvers that he was engaged in beforehand, or the boring things that didn't happen to do with the Cuban Missile Crisis or something. We're not interested in the day-to-day stuff like that. And Joe Biden's whole life has just been made up of procedural things. Now, there are these allegations of corruption, and you wonder where's the modern Woodward and Bernstein who feel like they're willing to risk their careers and their lives in order to get to the bottom of corruption at the highest levels. Whether you believe that exists or not, certainly there's enough out there for somebody to be pushing that and to be exploring that and to be meeting in a parking garage with some mysterious figure who's ratting out the administration. But you just don't see a lot of that kind of motivation. I read a huge amount. I have never read a book about Joe Biden, and I can't imagine what would induce me to do so.
No.
Can I take a crack at that?
You please.
That business about getting a book about Joe Biden that would sell more than 2,000 copies. So here's my vision. Here's my pitch. The cover would be a picture of a hand that has just removed a rusty straight razor from a pail of water, and the title of the book is "My Name Is Corn Pop." You tell me you wouldn't buy that book.
I might just buy it.
Buy that book.
Still not sure I'd read it. I want that title on the bookshelf somewhere.
Well, one of you guys were saying this previously, that when people buy books on politics, they usually don't even read them. They mostly are there for the bookshelf to impress their friends with how, yeah, exactly, shelf candy.
Yeah. Now, Scott just reminded me of something. Most everything I learned about how politics actually works, I learned in my 20s from watching reruns of Yes Minister on PBS. And the sort of segue between Yes Minister and Yes Prime Minister, where this non-entity of a minister his last name is actually Hacker, right? As he climbs the greasy pole, as the Brits call it, from minister to prime minister, this utter incompetent non-entity. If you were to remake this set in the United States, but make it as a tragedy instead of a comedy, it would be about Joe Biden. And the tragedy, of course, is what he's been doing to our country for so long, starting with poisoning the Supreme Court confirmation process as Ted Kennedy's attack dog. That said, I can sum all of this up for you, why these books don't sell, with a quote from a very famous man. Maybe you'll recognize this. Alexander Solzhenitsyn, who was talking about the Soviet Union, when he said, "We know that they are lying. They know that they are lying. They even know that we know they are lying. We also know that they know we know they are lying too. They, of course, know that we are certainly know that we know they are lying too as well, but they are still lying." And who wants to pay $9.99 for the Kindle of that? That's your right angle on that, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.